today's live event, we'll engage in a conversation with 3 heads of school from GOA's network on the lessons they've learned from this past year and how those takeaways are going to be informing their strategy for the future. My name is Sarah Tahir, and I am an Associate Director of Professional Learning at GOA. I'll be running through some brief logistics at the start of our talk today, and then moderating the Zoom chat. I'm also joined by Michael Nachbar, Executive Director at GOA, who will be facilitating our conversation in just a few moments. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists. Our guests today are Dr. Kathy Hall, Head of School at Noble and Greenough School outside of Boston, Mr. Mike Molina, Head of School at Bishop John T. Walker School for Boys in DC, and Dr. James Calrose White, Head of School at the Galloway School in Georgia. I am now going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Michael Nachbar, who will kick off our conversation today.
Hey, everyone. It is great having you all with us. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces on the screen, too. So welcome. To get us started, we thought we would start with some conversations that we're hearing pretty frequently among school heads around what happens post-COVID. On the one hand is that this is a slingshot moment for schools, an opportunity to rethink norms, to innovate, and to, quote unquote, do school differently. And the other is that it's a rebound moment to go back to normal, which sometimes has an implication of failure, but schools were doing really interesting things before this too, right? So I don't necessarily see it that way. Curious to hear from you. What do you think it means to go back to normal? Is there anything wrong with that? Or should we, in fact, be using this as a slingshot moment?
I'll jump in. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Of course, we've been talking so much about this. I think all of us as school leaders are trying to exist in the moment of managing constant crisis while realizing at some point the crisis ends and trying to have that long haul view. For me, it's a both and. There's so much that I think this has changed and how, we think about innovation in schools. I think almost exactly a year ago, it went from do we innovate to how do we innovate overnight. It suddenly completely took off the table the question mark of should we. And that was amazing. That moment of every single person in our schools going, how do we do this? Not should we do this? That mindset is something that I don't think you can put that back in the bottle. You can't just go back to normal where folks forget that they had the ability to pivot on a dime. For us to do, an academic schedule takes 5 years to design and implement? Well, we've done 3 in a year. And our renewed sense, yes, it's been exhausting, but the agility that our faculties have discovered in themselves. But for me, the coming back to normal and what we're all craving, and I think is so important, is the trauma this has inflicted on our communities. And I really do use the word trauma not too lightly. I think the post-COVID reconnecting of how do we look at that community rebuilding, the repairing, the reconnecting in incredibly intentional ways. Those things that have not been possible via Zoom, and we've only parts of our communities here at a time where parents have been off campus for over a year. And what does normal look like when you can't just go, okay, checkbox, we're back. There's true repair work to be done, anxieties to be healed, friendship to be made. We've entirely new groups of students and families don't know each other. And so for me, it's the normal is what our bread and butter is as independent schools, relationships, communities, those connections. While hopefully on the teaching and learning side, we have taken a new normal of what we're capable of and thinking differently about how we do assessments and how we do all those other pieces that felt like they're such elusive objects for us, are what I really hope we can take and build upon. And so separating those two out has been a lot of our thinking about the post-COVID world.
I'll jump in, and I agree with everything that has just been said, and also I have tried to remain as optimistic as possible throughout this entire process, and I will say that there have been ebbs and flows of my optimism. I have vacillated between sometimes when I'm looking down that tunnel, I can see the daylight at the end of that tunnel, and sometimes I look down that tunnel and I've seen another train coming at me at that tunnel. So it has been a roller coaster ride in terms of thinking thinking about the year, I agree that our schools have shown us that we can pivot on a dime, that we can innovate on the fly, that we can move and change things in ways that are at a pace that is much quicker than what we're used to. And for me, this idea of going back to normal, I don't even know exactly what the new normal is actually going to look like. I've been saying, we're going to try to get back to regular in terms of some of the things that we used to do, not so much the normal pieces. What it has done, at least for my community also, has given us an opportunity to really focus in on those things that are the most important to us. And that is, our students, our teaching and learning, the kinds of things that we know we're good at. It has allowed us to actually also look at some of the things that we were doing that we probably didn't need to do or that we shouldn't have done. So, this has been a real opportunity for us in the sense of trying to understand, what does it mean to stop doing things? Because I think our schools have so often just do, add. And COVID has really forced us to take a good hard look at that. And so for me, when I think about moving forward, I think about all the things that we've been able to add, but also some of the things that we've been able to shed, so that we can actually go forward in a more efficient, a more productive way. And in truth be told, I'm looking forward to a change of pace. I moved to the South for a reason. It's slower down here for a whole host of things. And I'm looking forward to getting back to a space where the relational capital that we build with our families and with our students and even with each other is something that is forefront as opposed to trying to manage the next crisis. So yeah, I'm excited, I'm optimistic, but I'm also realistic that it's still going to take time to get this done. But if anything, what this pandemic has shown us is that we can.
And well, thank you all for being present. I'm really excited to be here. I can't add anything except maybe to zoom out in perspective. This is my first year as a head, and so to come in this year, there is no normal for me. It doesn't exist. So I have to create that. But I try to look for perspective. What I tell my team a lot is, in a condition like this, the circumstance, there's no expertise. There's only experience. We have to go through it and figure out how to do it. The only thing that I can compare it to is post-Katrina New Orleans. I'm originally from New Orleans, and so I worked with folks who were returning to New Orleans and those who had resettled in Atlanta to try and recapture and reestablish themselves and get back into school. And so one of the things that we can know for sure is that when children have a fracture, when families have fractures like many of our families have in this context, it reveals things. It reveals weaknesses that pre-existed, but it also reveals new strengths. And so I think if we can go into the future with a spirit of curiosity, a spirit of open-mindedness as to what we find, we may find that, we will find, I think, that parents understand their child's learning style a little better now. They are more equipped to support teachers. They respect and appreciate teachers in a new way. And all of those new kind of skills that parents have can be tapped for future growth and future positivity in the community. So I think if we can keep that spirit of curiosity, openness to what we find when we start to return to what some may call normal, which I think we all know is not going to look exactly like we may think. I think we can find our way through to something really positive for our schools.
Yeah, I think that's a tension that's existed for a long time in schools, is between innovation and strategy. And I think for a long time, our schools have been innovating, James, like you're saying, right? It's like constant innovation without much strategy. And I think, that strategic innovation is probably the place that our schools are at, and thinking about what do we want to stick and what do we, right? Where do we want to innovate? And I think you're right. I think that idea of people viewing our faculty as professional educators is one of the biggest changes that's happened in schools, right? A lot of parents and guardians realizing, oh, I couldn't have been a teacher. It's not that easy. And so I'm curious, when it comes to that idea of innovation and being a slingshot moment, specifically around, teaching and learning, what you all see as being ripe for change moving forward in your schools.
I think, go ahead, James.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I think for us, the slingshot moment has been a renewed focus on health and wellness for our faculty, for our students, and where does that sit in the curriculum? We talk about, we never had time for it because we were always innovating and doing other things, and now we're finding that we are making time. We're finding that time that we couldn't find for whatever reason before the pandemic, to really focus in on those things. And so that has been, a pleasant kind of add-on, if you will, to some of the work that we've been doing here. And so, that's the piece that I'm still, struggling with in terms of how do we get that piece back when quote unquote normal is expected, right? It's kind of assumed that we will spend time on health and wellness and relationship building and all those kinds of things right now. But when the world goes back to whatever the normal is, how do I keep that there? And how do I continue to remind our faculty and our parents that this is just as important as English and math and science? And, so for me, I'm still really, intentional, trying to be much more intentional about how, not so much what we teach, but how we teach it, and the fact that that actually may be more important than what we teach our kids moving forward. So, that's where I've landed in some of this stuff. So.
Yeah, echoing all of that for sure. Here, so last summer, amidst like the complete deafening noise we were all dealing with around the many moving pieces, we honed in on three principles that have been my just steady drumbeat. It was health and safety, equity of access, and meeting each person where they are. And anyone who works at Nobles is like so tired of hearing me say it, but it's been the drumbeat that's allowed me to tune out a lot of the outlier, from the parent who thinks we should be doing 100% in person all the time to a faculty member who's at this extreme. But what that's allowed us to do, that the meeting each person where they are, what we have found is it's no longer this binary of it's either all in person or it's all a flipped classroom, or it's all of this or it's on all of that. It's allowed us to discover new toolkits that I think have served a purpose of helping us see how additive they can be. So as an example, we've actually found on the counseling front, and we're all so worried about student wellness, as James is just getting to, many of our students actually do far better in a Zoom one-on-one meeting with a counselor than they did when they were sitting in that person's office. Like, we've discovered ways to connect with kids that meet them where they are in a way that is more empathetic and empathic and gets to our concerns around equity of access and getting to our program. And I think that's been an eye-opening way for our teachers to think about assessment. It isn't just flipped classroom or not. It's actually, how do I now use these tools differently to help get my learning goals accomplished? And I just think it's changed the questions that many of our educators are asking. We have a mantra, mantra is probably the best word at Nobles, of relationship before task. It's something that we just say all the time. It's this notion of you can't get to the work unless you forge the relationships. And I believe we've found innovative ways to do that. I think everyone ahead of this would have said, you can't do that unless you're sitting in a brick and mortar classroom all the time. And in fact, I think we've turned some of that on its head. And has allowed us to really think a little differently about what innovation can look like. It's not just about how you're teaching the math class. It's also about how you're innovating and how you're building relationships and supporting student wellness and being strategic and long-term oriented. It's how we engage our parents. I think we've all seen, I bet we've seen a 500% increase in parent participation at meetings. We've completely rethought how our future is going to look like for us to allow parents to have entry to conversations on campus. I don't think we'll ever have a meeting again we don't record and post. And those things would have been the world's biggest deal to propose 2 years ago. And so I just think it's really changed the questions that we're asking. And innovation is no longer the buzzword. It's more just how do we think differently about equity, access, relationships, teaching and learning. It almost takes the word innovation out of it. And it's how do we just best do this, which by definition means we're innovating and thinking differently.
And yeah, the only thing I would add is that to feed that innovation, we have so much more information than we had before, right? In good and bad ways. We know we have parents in the classroom. We have teachers in the home. There's information in these recorded sessions that can be used and studied to improve what we do. So I think, again, if we can be curious and be open-minded to what we find when we return, I'm curious about where all this information is being stored, all these videos, right? And how can we maybe share that information, respectfully and legally, but how can we trade some of this information we're all gathering about our community so we can learn together?
There's like 5 strands I want to follow with all of this. I mean, it sounds like that question of, the role of hybrid and online learning clearly is just now part of the conversation, right? I mean, this is just something that we do, and it's just going to be part of that. I'm curious, like the impact of that on, other aspects of school and how far you think schools are ready to take that, specifically around like scheduling or hiring and staffing. Like, do you imagine a scenario where some of your faculty work remotely? Like, are there new roles to be created at schools after this? We hear about that in industry, right? That, people are leaving cities, and the way that office spaces are going to be used is shifting pretty dramatically. A lot of companies are not going back into the office 5 days a week. Are schools going to hold out on that, or are we going to think more flexibly about the ways that we engage students for health and well-being issues, but also same thing for faculty? And I want to dig deeper into that. But are we going to have online teachers or part-time online for our schools moving forward, or something like that?
I could give an example that's a little bit different. I think I'm new, so it's hard to think about making any. I was taught not to move any furniture around in the beginning, right? So I'm a little hesitant to make big changes in terms of people reporting or being present. But just one example I'll give is we have a family who is a military family who's deployed to another part of the country, and so the question, what we've been considering now is. And they'll be back in the fall, in October. So the question we're considering now is, can they start with us in the fall virtually, and avoid the problem of not enrolling and then trying to find a way to re-enroll? And that's opened up a really cool discussion about the possibility of extending what we do, and we serve a community with tuition free, and expanding who we serve to people who aren't in our immediate area. And is there a possibility that we could be a school without walls? So that's a beginning conversation, but it's something that is emerging out of trying to serve our families' needs, and then realizing, hey, there's something here that might have a root that we could branch from.
I think what's been, again, we've all been thinking so much about this, and I see this as chapters. So we have this current year chapter where we've all just done everything we can to support folks' needs where they are. We all have teachers who need to be virtual and have childcare issues, and all the ways you're trying to support it. There's going to be the next chapter where we're ostensibly all back, and yet there are people who have needs that put them in a really challenging position. We have faculty who have, young children who are severely immune compromised, who won't have the vaccine yet. We'll have all kinds of stories that obviously feel really important to us, and it's that question of what's the tail on sort of our ability to meet folks where they are, where we feel like it's actually compromising the in-person experience. And to your question, Michael, what's the new normal in what we're doing? I think we have learned through this, at least at my school, that we desperately miss the in-person community connections. That has been a loss for us, and we feel it acutely. We feel the difference of not being able to gather as faculty and huddled in groups, and we have a morning assembly routine that I can't imagine the next time 900 of us are in our auditorium, but that's like such a moving part of our program, and it's missing right now. And so I know for sure in-person matters to relationships and community. However, we've also found ways that we can meet people where they are in a more equitable and consistent way, by being able to open our doors virtually. And where does that line begin and end? I think about kids who are sick and come to school anyway because they're too worried to miss content. I mean, do we find ways to allow our kids who have concussions and can't watch things back later, or faculty who have extended illnesses? And there's these questions that are going to really push our thinking. And I think kind of go, where is that line of where it's essential to kind of have the core of community, and where does equity and supporting a broader community begin? I don't know that I have clear answers to that. I think we're going to have to, I think it's important we reserve the temptation to draw firm conclusions right now, when I think this will continue to evolve. And I think we have to be really careful and thoughtful that we answer those questions with our unique missions in mind. And the last thing I'll say on this is every one of the schools on the screen has a different set of principles that should anchor those answers. And there's no wrong way for any community to answer it. There's been so much judgment thrown everywhere, assuming the grass is greener at the next school. But every school is making the best choices that meet their community's needs, their demographic, their teaching and learning goals. And I think that's been challenging for our parents to navigate, and going, but the school down the road made XYZ choice, and but that worked for them, and this works for us. And I think the next chapter will be the same thing.
Ditto. There's nothing to add to that one. I mean, I think they're spot on.
I swear I'm forgetting to unmute of all the days and moments now. And Kathy, I know that I really like what you were saying about, there is an opportunity to mourn some of the things that we've lost because they're real, but it's also a moment to think about the things that we've gained as we've had to think around those. And I think the question, the words of the past year have been intentional and deliberate, right? Just how are we intentionally and deliberately rethinking how we build relationships, right? How we're being intentional and deliberate about how we are creating community. And so I'm actually curious, we've been talking as schools a lot about wellness and mental health and student well-being. But it also, this year, I think, in addition to seeing our faculty in a new professional spotlight, I think we're also paying attention to faculty wellness and well-being. And I'd love to hear how you're thinking about and approaching faculty well-being and wellness this year, and maybe what you're thinking about will change for you moving forward.
I mean, that's been a huge topic of conversation in terms of just trying to be back. And I'm sure that some of you who may be in person right now probably felt some of the anxiety as well in terms of what it meant to actually come back and be in person. And with us, having been in person since August, it has created all kinds of things. I keep reminding the faculty and staff here, and really for themselves, but also for our students, is that we have to remember that we're bringing baggage and things to the table now that we never ever did. And while we may have had them, they didn't manifest and show out in the same kinds of ways. That our ability to show and give more grace, our ability to ask more questions, in particular the question of going and asking for help. Those are all things that we're really trying to put more and more at the center of our conversations. So not starting conversations with, just the general "how are you," but really looking at each other and saying, "How are you?" And waiting for that answer, being in the moment. We've talked a lot here in terms of the faculty and staff, get in terms of, they miss each other, right? We're in person, and I would still say that we miss each other. We miss, as Kathy said, this idea to pod together and to laugh over jokes, or to do all the small things that I think build and grow camaraderie. And so for me, I've said to them all along, we're in this thing together for the long haul. We have to do some really incredible and strange and almost seemingly impossible things in the short term, but that our ability to continue to interact and to continue to be, together is still going to be something that is not just about just the now, it's about the long term. And so from the mental health perspective, we've tried to do a lot of things. We have been so graceful in terms of when you need it, ask for it, and we give it to you. I think about people who've stepped up. In terms of when there's been a quarantine, or when there has been, somebody had to be out for whatever reason. The camaraderie that this pandemic has actually created has been incredible. And again, we still miss each other, but boy, have the faculty really stepped up. And so, we're looking at things like, when we move into the next school year in terms of the schedule, how do we give people more time? How do we, we know that we can do things differently. And so if we're going to do them differently, we're going to prioritize this idea that, that relationships and healing and this mental health and wellness component is going to be at the forefront. So, we're really trying to look at this thing over the long haul and say, what do they need? And we've asked a lot of questions about, asking the faculty, what do you need? Do you need a day? Do you need a half a day? Do you need just a sub? Do you need, and they've been great about telling us. And what my team is doing now is really looking at all those needs and saying, as we really start to look into next year, how can we materialize some of them in our new normal? Because what we found is that it's helpful now, and if it's helpful now, we know it'll be helpful then. So for us, it's the forefront. You can't be a great teacher if you are so concerned and worried about you and your health or your family and those kinds of things, because you bring that to the table every day. And so what we're trying to do is help our faculty offload as much as they can within reason, so that they can be their best selves every time they come in here. And we're going to continue to look for ways to support them and to do that work, because that's important, and it's the lifeline of who we are as a school.
I agree with everything James just said, of course. I think we've all been looking for those ways to just buoy folks. I think with a terrible setup last summer is it feels like nationally teachers got put at odds with school reopenings. And the narrative that's been fed is sort of that teachers are trying to stand in the way. And I certainly in the Boston area on the public school side, it's been just appalling to kind of witness some of the back and forth. Last summer, I started to hear about petitions, right, where schools were announcing reopenings and teachers were like gathering to write. And I had this moment of like, my teachers don't need to petition not to come back. We're going to get to the other side of this. What do our communities look like when we get there? And for me, knowing our faculty believed and saw that I stood by them and behind them every step of the way, I'm like, once you lose that, I'm like, that's hard to refill. So I took a stand last summer, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And I'll admit it was a little scary in the moment. So it's just like all of us was sort of swirling, where I just said to everyone, no one has to come back. We're reopening. We'll be reopening safely. But wait to make a decision. Let's take a breath. Let's take the humidity out of the air. I'm going to fill you in on what we're doing. We had a medical panel, we did all the things. But if you don't feel it's safe to return, I'll support you. And there was just this tipping point of it no longer was I need to petition for my safety. It was instead the school's going to meet me where I am on that. And that's been hard to pull off, but it's been unbelievably important. What's been challenging is recognizing our communities are at very extreme needs right now. So we have faculty who have legitimate anxiety that many of our parents can't understand. And there's all the confusing data points out there about how COVID spreads in schools. And then there's the reality that our teachers don't feel safe. And that is something that we have to understand and know. And what has been, I think, that moment for many of us as school leaders is recognizing where we need to insulate and say, I'm going to hold my parents over here and say, this is exactly what we're doing and why, and where I actually need to help move my faculty forward and say, I know you're anxious, but it's going to be okay. So it was when we said we're coming back in the fall, and you're going to be okay. And I'll support you if you need a chance to, take a break. And then most recently, we've announced a full reopening, and we're doing it after vaccines, or we've picked the line after we know everyone's been vaccinated. And I know that's creating anxiety, even though it's irrational. You might say you've been vaccinated, you can get back. And now it's the moment as a head of school to say, and it's going to be okay. We need to get back now. We've done everything we can to support people where they are. And so it's realizing both can be true. And to everything James said, trying to find what are the obstacles in your way. We've offered childcare programs. We've done gift cards for Amazon. We all kind of fling things to try to do it, while realizing we can't solve the anxiety that's there. What we can do is sometimes be the strong leader that says we're going to push you through it, and at times say I'm going to hold off those who have a different opinion on it. But sometimes it's hard to know where that line is, and sometimes your leadership team doesn't know where that line is, and folks are anxious about faculty anxiety. But I look at what's happened in our public schools, where they are in Boston, they're forcing teachers to come back without vaccines at the 11th hour, and the trust that gets eroded when you decide to kind of plow through. You know how hard that is to rebuild and repair. So to me, that's been a priority not to lose.
And I would just echo everything. But the one word that stands out that James used is grace. And shout out Jen Danish, who is from Grace Episcopal. She's on our board. She's a head as well. She's extended, and the board has extended me grace. I've tried to extend that to our faculty. Our faculty have given it to parents back to faculty. And really the people who've given us all the most grace are the children. And I think if we keep centered in what the children have learned in this time period, yes, they've been isolated. Yes, they've been on screens too long. Yes, they may have lost some classroom skills, but they've also they've grown over this time period. And there's some grace that they have extended to all of us adults that will make them more wise and resilient and able to really thrive once they are back in full effect. And the other thing I'll just say quickly is that I've also talked about the difference between worries and concerns, right? Concerns are specific, related to something that we can solve. You raise a concern, let's do something about it. But a worry is that kind of low hum of challenge that someone might be feeling. And when someone's worried, they need TLC. Like, no fact is going to change that, right? So I've tried to distinguish for myself when someone is expressing a worry and when they're expressing a concern, and try to be the pastor when it's a worry, and try to be the field marshal when it's a concern. So, I think we're all learning a lot. We're all growing a lot. And if we continue to give each other grace, we'll be all right.
Mike, I love your poet specificity of language that you're using to distinguish between those things. And I think you're right. And I think, just like also with our teachers, that ethic of care that they show their students is the thing that matters most. And Kathy, to what you're saying, it's applying that ethic of care, but also with boundaries, right? Like, even as teachers, we care authentically about our students, but we also have boundaries. And similarly, leading a school, you need to know, when what those lines are, and when you need to, draw different ones. And I think that's really important. Let's switch a little bit to talking about schools as communities, because this is something that I'm hearing a lot and seeing crop up with different places. And the idea that, that we are community hubs, not just for students, but for parents and guardians as well. So, in the past, even small things like drop off and pickup were moments that people could gather, right? They could gather and they could connect. And we have lost that this year. And there are some schools that have created opportunities for parents and guardians to connect, through different avenues during the year. But I'm curious how schools are thinking about what ways that they are looking to be the hub of a community moving forward. Is this something that you're thinking about differently? Like, I'm seeing some schools create like parent guardian programming, right? Like art classes for parents, or, like conversation topics that aren't necessarily guest speakers, but for them. So how are you guys thinking about school as a community hub, given what we've lost and things that have changed?
I'll jump in just because our school is so unique. We're a tuition-free K-5 Episcopal school. We're mission-based, and so we serve our families' needs in a lot of ways. So that is, I'm generally optimistic, but that's one of those things that it's a loss. It's a trauma that we haven't been able to be together. And so we've tried to serve needs. We have an emergency fund to help our families with everything from rent to childcare to food. And that's something that we'll extend and we'll keep doing. We've been able to increase our pot for that because of people's care and love for what we are up to as a mission. But there's no real way around it. There's a loss. There's tremendous loss when folks aren't able to be present and see each other and have that energetic exchange that happens when people are in the same room, same space together. And what I'm looking forward to is the kind of rush of relief and emotion and joy at the start of the fall, right? When or at the start of the January. Like, I don't want to get too excited about anything these days, but at that point when we know we're on the other side of this thing, there's going to be an explosion of relief, joy. How do we get prepared for that? How do we make sure that we know it's coming and rally it and use it to surf it forward into some positivity? So I'll just put that out there.
Just building on that, I've been so aware this year of, it's been so clear the two very different roles, different ways our parents connect with our schools. And one is the being informed, being connected. And actually we've gotten like an A+ on that, right? I mentioned like Zoom has allowed us to reach so many more people. I think I do regular town halls. I've got like 400 people attend them every other week, and things like that never happen. But where, to what Mike was just saying, I think where we just suffered is in the community connections. And increasingly our parents and guardians see our schools as their churches and temples and synagogues and places of worship and connection and community. And we're seeing nationally that demographic of attendance and places of worship really diminishing. And I think our parents increasingly seeing these school communities that they're invested in as where that community and where their base happens. And I think I will speak from my perspective. I underestimated the personal loss for parents. I initially heard the noise from them where they talked about how lonely their kids are, right? I started last spring with graduation and hearing from the parents how devastating this was for the kids. And it took a lot to go, okay, no, it's devastating for them. Like actually the kids were doing a lot better than the parents around a lot of this. I had a parent just last week of an 8th grader, and actually I know the kid's doing just fine. He kept talking about his daughter, how isolated. He finally said, I'm feeling so isolated. And I think recognizing what these parents and guardians are missing in their own social network, in their own sense of mission-driven purpose. And we cannot make up for that with Zoom. And I think we're going to have back to the repair and rebuild. We have a lot of new families. We have about 100 new families a year who feel like they know no one. And where does that happen? It's sidelines of games. It's watching the musical. It is drop off and pick up. We're going to have to get back to that, and then we're going to have to manufacture some stuff. So we're brainstorming even this spring, trying to do some grade level socials out under a tent. And we are trying to get parents back on sidelines. There's things that's hard to make up, and yet we're going to have to be extremely intentional about it. And I think the sooner we can refill that well, a lot of what they're coming at us about with the minutia and the logistics, it's really about their own sense of isolation. It's not about how much their kid is prepared for the AP Chem exam coming out of this year. And so I think we can't underestimate the importance of that kind of rebuilding for our parents and guardians along the way.
Yeah, and for us, I think for the big piece is that because we have been in school all along, our parents have really kind of stepped up and they've created, for example, their own pods. So we have our kids podded, and so they've done a lot of work with the pods of their own kids in terms of book clubs and meeting together outside, socially distanced, and so forth. So what's been really fascinating for me is that this is their hub, and this is the place where they want to be. But they've also used our own structures that we have in place for the kids to actually help themselves, because they were feeling isolated and they were feeling alienated from all the things that were going on. And we found that the engagement actually has been high via Zoom. It's amazing. You couldn't get people to come to an afternoon meeting here in Atlanta, whether it be for traffic or for whatever other reasons. But now, we have hundreds of people that will come to different meetings. But our PA Association also has just been tremendous in terms of helping our families find different ways to connect, even with our new families. And so we did, they organized with a group of parents to do drive-bys of every new family's house and give them a yard sign and things of that nature. So I will say that from my perspective, it is not normal to not have them on campus and those kinds of things. But like their kids and like us, they're making the best of what is a bad situation by trying new things. And so I've been really impressed with that. And the great thing is, honestly, truth be told, is that they've done a lot of it without asking us to do it for them. Whereas in the past, when they're on campus, they're always asking, can you get a meeting for us? Can you get a space for us? Can you get this, that, and the other? And organically, they have taken it upon themselves to continue to create that community outside of us. So I'm curious and excited to see what that starts to look like when we're back next year and can have them on campus. Will they keep up these things, and then, or will they go back to their normal, which is, hey, James, can you do this for us, or can you get this room? So it'll be interesting to see how it goes back. But I've been very impressed with our families in terms of they recognize that loss and they've stepped in to try to bridge it as best that they can.
I love that. The power of our schools as communities is really strong, as is this one. So I want to thank you all for joining us. Michael, Kathy, James, thank you for your time. Kathy, I know you're on spring break, so I owe you one. It was really great to speak with you all, and I will now hand it back to you, Sarah.
Great. Thank you all so much. I wish we could keep this going for hours. There's so much to unpack in what you all have said. Just to close out our time today, as a reminder, our session today was recorded, and we will be posting that recording on our website. So feel free to share it with colleagues, and you'll be emailed a copy as well. If you are interested in exploring some of the ideas discussed today in more detail, we do encourage you and your colleagues to sign up for our summer institutes, which includes 2 design institutes geared towards educators, and then our soon to be announced Leadership Institute. And then we also encourage you to continue to join us for future network events like these hosted by GOA. So from all of us, thank you so much, panelists, for your time and your wisdom. And thank you all participants for joining us today. We look forward to continuing to learn from and with you all. So thank you. Take care.